Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we embark on a journey through the annals of time, uncovering the secrets and stories that have shaped our world. Today, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of one of the most pivotal and brutal conflicts in human history, the Battle of Passchendaele, a clash of titans that would etch its name into the very fabric of World War I. As we delve into this narrative, let us first set our gaze upon the broader canvas of the Great War. By 1917, the conflict had already ravaged the European continent for 3 years, leaving in its wake a trail of devastation and unprecedented human suffering. The war, which began as a complex web of alliances and nationalist tensions, had by this point become a grinding, merciless struggle between the Entente powers, France, Britain, and Russia, and the Central Powers, led by Germany. In the spring of 1907, the Western Front, stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border, was a battleground where millions of soldiers on both sides were entrenched in a stalemate that seemed impossible to break. The landscape itself had become a victim of war, transformed into a desolate expanse of mud, barbed wire, and the remnants of what once were thriving communities. It was against this backdrop that Field Marshal Douglas Haig, Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force (BEF), began to formulate a plan aimed at breaking through the German defenses in Flanders, Belgium. Haig's strategic vision was to push the Germans back from the Belgian coast, thereby securing key ports and disrupting the U-boat bases that were wreaking havoc on Allied shipping. The region of Passchendaele, with its low-lying plains and occasional ridges, might seem an unassuming place, but it held significant strategic value. The village itself sat atop a ridge, offering commanding views of the surrounding countryside. Whoever controlled this ground could potentially dictate the flow of battle across the broader Flanders region. The British Army, bolstered by troops from across the empire, prepared for a major offensive. In the opposing trenches, German forces, well-entrenched and battle-hardened, awaited the onslaught. In the weeks leading up to the battle, both sides engaged in feverish activity. The British launched a series of preliminary attacks aimed at securing key positions and weakening the German defenses. Meanwhile, the Germans, under the command of General Erich Ludendorff, fortified their lines, anticipating the main assault. The summer of 1907 was marked by relentless artillery bombardments, with both sides trading blows in a deadly game of attrition. As we move closer to the eve of the Battle of Passchendaele, the tension builds. Soldiers on both sides, weary from months of trench warfare, steeled themselves for what was to come. The air was heavy with anticipation, the outcome hanging precariously in the balance. In the final days before the battle, the British Army made its preparations, amassing troops and artillery along a front that stretched from the ruined village of Ypres northwards towards the coast. The plan was ambitious. A breakthrough at Passchendaele would pave the way for an advance on the Belgian ports, potentially altering the course of the war. As the final preparations were made, the British Army stood poised on the brink of one of the most pivotal battles of the Great War. The offensive, codenamed Operation Hush, was set to commence on July 31, 1917, with a massive artillery bombardment designed to shatter the German defenses and pave the way for an advance on Passchendaele Ridge. The British guns, arrayed along a front stretching from Ypres to the coast, opened fire at 35 a.m., unleashing a maelstrom of steel and fire that would shake the very foundations of the earth. The initial bombardment was followed by a creeping barrage, with British troops advancing behind a wall of shell fire that slowly moved forward, intended to clear a path to the German trenches. However, the muddy terrain, churned up by weeks of rain and artillery fire, proved a formidable obstacle. Tanks, intended to lead the way and break through the German lines, found themselves bogged down in the quagmire, their tracks spinning futilely as they sank deeper into the mire. Despite these challenges, British troops made initial gains, pushing forward through the wreckage of no man's land and overrunning several key German positions. The village of Pilkum, situated on the northern flank of the battlefield, was captured on the first day, while to the south, troops from the 15th Scottish Division fought their way into the outskirts of St. Julian. However, as the day wore on, the advance slowed, and the British found themselves facing increasingly stiff resistance. The Germans, who had been anticipating the attack, had fortified their positions with machine gun nests, barbed wire, and concrete bunkers, all but impervious to artillery fire. As the British troops struggled forward, they were cut down in droves by withering machine gun fire, their bodies piling up in the mud like so many discarded ragdolls. The cries of the wounded and dying filled the air, mingling with the stench of death and decay that hung over the battlefield like a miasma. As the days turned into weeks, the battle became a grinding war of attrition, with both sides trading blows in a desperate bid for supremacy. The British continued to push forward, inching their way up Passchendaele Ridge, but at a terrible cost in lives. On August 16, 1917, troops from the 56th Division launched a fresh attack on the village of Langemarck, fighting their way through the ruins and capturing several key buildings. However, the Germans counterattacked, driving the British back and retaking much of the lost ground. The battle raged on, with both sides suffering horrific casualties. On September 20, 1917, the British launched a major attack on the Menin Road Ridge, hoping to break through the German lines and push on towards Passchendaele. The assault was preceded by a massive artillery bombardment, which shattered the German defenses and allowed the British to make significant gains. However, as before, the advance was slow and costly, with troops from the 1st Australian Division fighting their way forward yard by bloody yard. As the autumn rains set in, the battlefield became an unholy mess of mud, blood, and destruction. The ground was churned up into a morass of water-filled craters and shell holes, making every step a perilous journey. Men struggled through the mire, weighed down by their equipment and their own exhaustion as they fought to survive in one of the most God-forsaken places on earth. "The whole area is a sea of mud," wrote one British officer, "and the stench of death hangs over everything like a pall." In this nightmarish landscape, the battle continued, with both sides locked in a struggle that seemed to have no end. The British pushed forward, inch by inch, but at a cost that was almost unbearable. On October 4, 1917, troops from the 3rd Australian Division launched a fresh attack on the village of Brudsinde, fighting their way through the ruins and capturing several key positions. However, as before, the Germans counterattacked, driving the British back and retaking much of the lost ground. As the battle raged on, it became clear that Passchendaele Ridge was not going to be taken easily. The Germans had fortified their positions with every trick in the book, from machine gun nests to concrete bunkers, and were determined to hold on at all costs. The British, meanwhile, were beginning to feel the strain of months of fighting, their troops exhausted and depleted by the endless casualties. Yet still they pushed forward, driven by a determination to break through the German lines and bring an end to the war. As the autumn rains continued to pour down on the battlefield, the British finally made a breakthrough on November 6, 1917, when Canadian forces captured the village of Passchendaele, marking a significant turning point in the battle. The Germans, exhausted and depleted, began to withdraw from their positions, allowing the British to claim a hard-won victory. However, the cost had been staggering, with over 400,000 casualties on both sides, including more than 100,000 dead. The Battle of Passchendaele, also known as the Third Battle of Ypres, would go down in history as one of the most brutal and futile conflicts of World War I. The ground is a sea of mud, and the stench of death hangs over everything like a pall. It's a victory, but it feels like defeat. In the years following the battle, Passchendaele became a symbol of the horrors of war and the senseless slaughter of young men on the Western Front. The battlefield was left largely untouched, serving as a grim reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict. Today, the site is home to several cemeteries and memorials, including the Tyne Cot Cemetery, which contains the graves of over 11,000 British soldiers. The legacy of Passchendaele extends far beyond the battlefield itself. The battle marked a turning point in the war, as public opinion began to shift against the conflict, and politicians started to question the strategic decisions of their military leaders. In the years that followed, the battle would be remembered as a cautionary tale about the dangers of militarism and the importance of diplomacy. The battle may have been fought over a century ago, but its impact continues to be felt, serving as a reminder of the devastating consequences of war and the importance of striving for peace. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, remember that to understand the present, we must first understand the past.